Welcome to the Tough Decisions Network. This is our special Sunday edition called Survive and Thrive with Dennae. Your host, Dennae Hanford, will dive deep into chapter-by-chapter discussions on specifically selected books to help you make better decisions as an entrepreneur. Visit toughdecisions.net to sign up for our free weekly entrepreneur email. Before we get started, let's hear from one of our sponsors. Have you ever thought about investing in real estate, but find yourself so busy that you don't have time for it? Do you have FOMO, which is the fear of missing out? At HanfordCapital.com, we help investors with passive real estate investments that project better returns than traditional investment vehicles such as the stock market. If you'd like to find out more about our passive real estate investments, visit HanfordCapital.com. That's HANDFORD Capital.com. We will jump on a call with you to discuss your investment goals and to see if our investments are a good fit for you. This advertisement is not to be construed as an offer or recommendation to buy or sell a security. Visit HanfordCapital.com.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today, Sunday, July 22nd. I wanted to do a quick bonus session on The Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. We've taken the last 7 Sundays and talked about a section of the book each day, and I've tried to give you some practical things as well as, make sure that you understand the theory behind Simon Sinek's ideas as well as the practicality of them. But I wanted to take today and just give you a few of the suggestions that he puts and includes in the back of his book. So he spends the majority of the book talking about corporate culture and how leaders of corporations can develop the type of culture that will not only be good for people, but also good for business. And I think that is a key point here because he spends a lot of time talking about creating an environment that is good for people and good for humanity, if you will. That's a big idea for him. But he's not saying and not advocating that we create a happy, and in one place in the book, he even refers to it as a hippie-like culture where everyone feels good and all is well, but the company is not making any money. What he actually advocates is that when properly set up, this culture that is good for people is also good for business. It's good for customers. It's good for the bottom line in the long term. And so that is an important idea and an important concept to understand is that business is still business, and we still do have the goal of a successful business, but not at the expense of the people who are in the business. So with that being said, I wanted to kind of go over some of his practical suggestions that he includes at the end of the book, because as you recall, he spent a lot of time at the end talking about the millennial generation and a lot of the challenges that they have. And technically, I am part of the millennial generation, so I do understand some of the things that he's referring to, maybe more specifically than others. I know I'm on the early end of the millennial generation, so maybe I'm not as affected as maybe those born right in the middle of that time period. Remember, it's the early 1980s to early 2000s. But I do understand some of these problems, if you will, struggles pretty personally. But he offers some suggestions, and I thought some of them were really, really helpful. They were really helpful, especially to me as a parent, and gave me some things to think about. So I wanted to give you just a few of those to maybe chew on a little bit and decide what, if anything, you may need to implement in your own life personally, or perhaps even for your corporation. Now, he starts off by saying again that based on our growing up culture, millennials do have a lot of strengths that some of the other generations did not have. He talks about the fact that they tend to be more accepting of people, and that can be a good thing. And he also talks about the fact that they demand more from their leaders in the way of purpose. Millennials, more so than previous generations, they want something to work for more than just money. We all need money to live, but you had some generations before where that was the purpose. And now you have a pretty loud clamoring from the generation coming in that said, yeah, we want money, we want to be comfortable, but we want something more. Like, we don't want to just work for money. And so they are calling on their leaders and clamoring for purpose. And that is one thing that makes them a difficult employee to keep, though, because if you don't give them that purpose and you don't give them something to work for, they're not going to wait around. So they're not like the previous generation where they just go to work, grab a paycheck, and move on. They got other things to do. They're not going to wait around because they also have resources at their disposal to create their own business. And I personally think that might be one of the reasons why we're seeing so many small businesses and so many people deciding to do the entrepreneur lifestyle. And that, we talk about that a lot here on the Tough Decisions for Entrepreneurs podcast. But I think that might be one reason why we see so many people going their own way and deciding to work for themselves and deciding to be an entrepreneur, because they're searching for a bigger purpose. And when leaders don't give that to them, then they also have the resources to go and do it themselves, or at least attempt to do it themselves. It doesn't mean they're going to be successful, but they can at least try it, and they will, because of the way they grew up. Travel is not a hindrance. Time and space is not as much of a hindrance because travel is so easy. Technology is, as we've talked about, just everywhere, and they're comfortable using it. So those kinds of things don't limit them, and they're not afraid to take full advantage of them. So as leaders of a company, we need people that are willing to jump on board our vision. And so the question becomes, how can you take this millennial generation that does have some weaknesses, but help them with their weaknesses and then use their strengths to the advantage of the company? So Sinek offers several recommendations. First of all, he says that you should make a policy and keep the conference room free of cell phones. And this may seem like a little thing. It may seem like something that's really not that important or not going to make that big of an impact. But remember, the millennial generation, and I say that and include myself, we tend to be a generation that, as Sinek says, is addicted to distraction. And so if you intend to actually accomplish something in your conference room, requiring that it be cell phone free is almost a must. He also, remember, has talked about how important it is to develop relationships in person, person to person. Phones are nice, Skype is wonderful, but nothing can take the place of person-to-person interaction. And so when everyone comes into the conference room and everyone is looking down at his or her cell phone or iPad, you're removing an opportunity where people can just talk. The value of just talking, I think, is vastly underrated. We also need the conference rooms to be cell phone free because remember, we actually want conversation, we want interaction, we want problem solving going on in the conference room. And the cell phone or the iPad is just something to keep that from happening. He also says that these corporate leaders should encourage note-taking on paper instead of computer. So he takes it a step further and said, when you're in a meeting or you're in a conference room, have everyone bring a notepad. And I know that sounds like you're actually creating more work for people because you know what they're going to do. They're going to take it back to their office and they're going to copy those notes into a computer. But remember what the goal is, right? It's to make people more productive while also encouraging these personal relationships. And there's actually a lot of research that supports better thinking, better critical thinking, better decision-making, better processing of information when it's handwritten versus being typed into a computer or read off of a computer. So he says that would be another step to take is encourage note-taking on paper. He also offers a suggestion, if you have somebody or you feel like you just need the digital notes, then it's also an option to have everyone bring a notepad so they can take their own notes and then just assign one person to be your digital note taker. And when the meeting's over, then they can email everybody the information. I actually tried this at our last corporate meeting and it was interesting. I think I'm going to do it a couple more times just to see when we have a monthly corporate meeting with our corporate heads, corporate managers. And last time I took my computer, but I never pulled it out. I just pulled out my notebook and was ready to write down anything that needed to be written down or recorded or saved for later for myself, and it was interesting. I think I'm going to try it some more and see what happens with that. He also says that corporate leaders should make it a point to actually teach leadership and not just assume that these were skills or this is a skill set that has been learned by the millennial generation in college or high school or whatever. I think that's a whole section there that we can talk about. There's a lot of programs that you can purchase to implement in your company, or you can take some time yourself to actually mentor and teach these younger people how to be good leaders. The key is you have to be practicing those things, at least in part yourself. And that's not saying none of us are perfect, but we have to understand what skills are needed, and we have to be learning and developing those skills ourselves. Also, make it a point to specifically teach the millennials under your care how to give and receive feedback. If you recall, this is something that they somewhat struggle with because as a whole, I know this is not true for all of them, but as a whole, they've been coddled and they've been, told how wonderful they are and you need to have great self-esteem. They've been told that without a lot of constructive criticism. And here, let me help you do this better. Or here, let me help you with something that you actually didn't do very well. They've never been told that on a consistent basis. So dealing with criticism and how to respond and how to improve is not something that they're naturally going to be good at. So we have to teach them how to receive and use and give constructive feedback. He also talks about giving millennials the opportunity to fall. I want to take just a minute because I really like his distinction here. We talk a lot about embracing, the phrase he uses is embracing failure. And I understand what people are saying with that, so I'm not trying to advocate a term change or anything like that. But when we're talking about business, I don't want my business to fail, right? Failure in business, we're talking about no more business. So I don't necessarily want a business failure. What he says, though, is there can be a difference between failure and a fall. And I think that's more what most people are talking about when they say failure. They're actually talking about a fall, right? A project, a product, something that they've attempted that just didn't really work out. And there's no problem with that at all. That's the way that we learn. Several things come to mind, but I've talked recently with someone that said there is no failure, there's only feedback. And if we look at it that way, our whole perspective changes, right? Well, there wasn't a failure. It didn't work out, but I got a lot of feedback and now I'm ready to make a better attempt. So we need to give millennials opportunities to fall. And by that, give them smaller projects, give them things to work on. And if it doesn't work out, then, help them learn from it and move on and give them something else to work on. Give them another project to work on because that's the way that we learn. And they need to learn to have responsibility and be responsible for the success or failure of something. But you don't want to start with the entire business riding on their shoulders. You have to start with a smaller project. Give them an opportunity to do really great, or give them an opportunity to really mess it up. And then when they do, you have the opportunity to mentor and teach them and help them learn from that. We also need to offer more opportunities to develop human skills for the millennials because, again, as a whole, their human interpersonal skills are going to be weaker than the generations before them because they have spent so much time on a cell phone, with an iPad, on a computer, talking via social media instead of actually developing a relationship. Now, I like also how he shifts because he also offers some suggestions for millennials. So if you are part of this millennial generation, then be willing to look at yourself objectively and say, what are some strengths and what are some weaknesses that I have? And he talks about the millennials and says, learn to solve your own problem. When your boss gives you something to do and you don't know exactly where to start, well, figure it out. Ask people, do some research, but learn to push through and solve your own problem. Remember last week we talked about how, millennials, they see the goal. They see the goal of having a purpose and shooting for significant influence and impact, but they miss the whole mountain that's staring them in the face. And so when they start pushing towards that purpose, encounter problems, then they tend to not know how to respond because they didn't even see that problem. They didn't even see the mountain there to start with. And he takes the whole analogy much further, but teaching them and creating an environment where you have to solve your own problem and pushing them to completion. Don't allow yourself to be lazy and don't allow yourself to become distracted from what you're working on. Discipline yourself to push something to completion. He also suggests that millennials start to look for someone, or maybe more than one, someone who can give them some critical feedback and appreciate that. I was recently talking and we had someone suggest a book, and I think I'm going to read it here shortly because I like the whole concept. It's called Hug Your Haters. And the book is really written to business owners about how to use the customers that are unhappy with them to improve the business. But the whole concept, I love it because it embraces this idea of critical feedback and how it can help us improve. And then lastly, he says to millennials, you need to cold turkey your phone and basically set some guidelines. So hard and fast guidelines for when and when you will not use your cell phone or your digital means of distraction. He specifically talks about, at the meal table, just make a pact with yourself that from this point on, there will not be any cell phones at any meal table. And in addition to that, he also suggests, if you're married or you have a relationship with a significant other, that you make a pact that you're not going to bring a cell phone on a date with that person. Now, there are some problems, obviously, that you might run into. For instance, my husband and I, Dan and I, we have 4 kids. So when we go out, we have to have the cell phone to, allow the babysitter to be able to contact us. Sinek offers a suggestion for that I think I'm probably going to try next time is that, if you have to have a cell phone because you have a babysitter at home, then take one phone and let the other person keep it. So if we took my phone, then I would put my phone in Dan's possession and let him keep it for the entirety of the night. I like that idea, and I think I'm going to try it because it's so easy to just, you're sitting there, you're waiting on your meal. Oh, let me pull out my phone and see what's going on. We don't need to do that. And the truth is, as much as we want to pretend like we're needed and it's urgent, 99.9% of the stuff that we say is urgent can actually wait. Now, it might be nice to take care of it, but it can actually just wait. And so what are we saying about how much we value the other person when we insist on looking at our cell phone and checking our cell phone and seeing if someone you're 500 miles away wants to talk to me, when this person who's sitting right in front of me, who I say I love and value, and I can't even, sit in a meal without seeing if a person 1,500 miles away, whatever it is, wants to talk to me or needs something from me, and when it can actually wait. Then finally, he offers a couple of suggestions as parents, and these are definitely some good things to think about. He says a digital-free family vacation. Our kids are still kind of young, so we're not fighting this as much as maybe some others, but I love this idea. And making that pact with the family, or, maybe your kids are not on board, but you're just going to insist because this is important. This is about their skills. This is about their life. And in my opinion, that's why kids are born with parents, because they don't know what's best for them. So, teaching them and training them is super, super important. He also suggests, coming up with a cell phone contract with your children. Again, my kids are probably a little small for this. They don't even have cell phones yet. But he offers some suggestions about this contract that I think are worth considering. Number 1, the phone can never be used or kept in the child's bedroom. Child cannot have the phone at any meal table. This is an interesting one. If friends come over, all the children have to forfeit their phones while they're together. And so what you're saying then to your child's friends is, hey, when you're here with my child, you guys, your interpersonal relationship is the most important thing. And they can't really develop a friendship if they're all sitting in a bedroom looking at Facebook and, chatting with people that aren't even in the room. That doesn't even make sense. But yet so many times that's how it happens. Restrict the times when they're allowed to use their phones and if any of the terms are violated, whatever the terms you happen to set up are, then the child should lose their phone for a designated period of time. He also suggests things like spinning the password, where the family changes the password every day or every week. And the kid, in order to get the password for the internet, has to complete, whatever is chores or reading or whatever the parents say and set up as the hurdle to get the password. And of course, lead by example. That's a big one. If we're going to expect these things from our children, then we have to be willing and able to do them ourselves so that we can show them how it's done, not just expect it. And then finally, he ends with the challenge of that being a parent is hard work. And it is much easier to just throw your child a cell phone or an iPad or even put them in front of the TV, because that's just easier. We can get more done. We can, be free from child distraction that way, but that's not really what's good for them. And so we have to stop and ask ourselves, are we willing to do the hard work of parenting so that we can bring up a generation of people that actually knows how to deal with other people? They're not addicted to distraction. They're not addicted to, achievement. We've talked about the dopamine and how video games and Facebook and other social media outlets can actually become a dopamine addiction. So in order to do that, in order to help our kids with that, we have to be willing to do the hard work. And I'm not saying that they should never have an iPad or they should never, be allowed on social media ever at any age. That's not practical either. But making sure that we help them and give them the skills and the self-regulation, that we help develop that. All those things are really important, and all that takes time, and it takes investment from the parents. So are we willing to do that? Are we willing to do that with millennials under our care in our businesses? Because they need help with these things. And so if we're going to help them, that's going to take hard work. All right, so that brings us to the end of Leaders Eat Last by Simon Sinek. I would strongly encourage you to still, even if you've listened to every week of our podcast, I would still strongly encourage you to get the book and read it yourself. We have a link in the show notes on every episode to where you can get the book. You can listen to it. You can get it on Audible. You can get it on Kindle. You can get the paper version. I've listened to it as well as read the whole thing. It's a good book, and I think there's still a lot of things that you would gain from actually reading or listening to it yourself. Next week, July 29th, we're going to start looking at some concepts from a book called Thrive by Arianna Huffington, and I've started going through that book. We're going to do it a little bit differently, where I will just pull some concepts for 3 or 4 weeks to discuss on our Sunday morning show. Probably not going to go through 7 or 8 week summary like we did Leaders Eat Last, because I feel like it's a little bit different kind of book, but hopefully it'll still be helpful, and we'll start that next Sunday, July 29th. Thank you so much for listening today. Please let us know. Contact us via Facebook or our Tough Decisions page or toughdecisions.net. Send us a message, comment on a link. We'd love to hear from you. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are, and if there's anything specific that you would like to hear about, or if there's anything that any books that you have as far as recommendations that you'd like to see us read and talk about. I'd love to hear any of those comments or recommendations, or critical feedback if you have that as well, because I'm a millennial, but hopefully I'm learning to accept that critical feedback. So if you have that, I would love to hear from you, and I hope you have a good week. And I will be back with concepts from Thrive by Arianna Huffington.
Thank you for listening to the Tough Decisions Network. Be sure to visit toughdecisions.net to gain access to show notes for this episode and to join our free weekly entrepreneur email, where we will send you news about the latest technology for your business, inspiring quotes, and the latest books for entrepreneurs. That's toughdecisions.net.